All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Kellie Hedberg, and I am just so honored that I get to be leading this discussion on how to help. I am one of the student pastors here at Edinbrook Church, along with Tyler Rowland. We have the privilege of working with teenagers, and this is just something that is a huge passion on my heart to get to give students and parents the tools that they need to navigate the really tricky waters of mental illness. A couple things about me. I graduated from Bethel University in December of 2020. I studied secondary English education, and during those years I spent time being a TA in the educational psychology department. And so I got to spend a lot of time learning about the adolescent mind. And I really, really care about that. I find it very fascinating. I also spend my mornings teaching language arts to 7th and 8th graders, and I spend my afternoon and evenings with teenagers at youth groups. So I spend all of my time with all of these amazing teenagers. Beyond that, though, I got to have some training when I was an RA in college of how to respond to mental health crisis situations. And I even have my own personal experience. I was very much a teenager who struggled with her mental health. And when I was 16, I started to first feel the effects of mental illness, and struggled throughout high school. By the time I got to college, I finally started to open up about my story. I began to get some therapy, and I got my first diagnosis of depression and anxiety. And then it wasn't until after I graduated college that I finally got a complete diagnosis along with some appropriate medication of bipolar 2 disorder. And along the way, it has just been quite a journey for me to navigate what that looks like, figuring out different therapies, different counseling, different medications, and how to best care for myself and my mental health so that I can glorify God to the best of my ability. So I'm just very passionate about giving resources and tools to anybody who might be struggling. And that's one of the realities that we do know is that this is a very, very, very common thing. And so getting to have this conversation, I think, is really important. So before we get started, I do want to say that at SWAP Student Ministries, we have a ton of resources that we would love to make available to you. We have parent packets, we have books and podcasts, and all of these different recommendations that we could give you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us because we would love to be a resource to you as you are trying to navigate the tricky waters of mental health and mental illness with whatever teenager God has placed in your life, whether that be a child, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, maybe someone that you are a mentor towards, whatever that may look like. I'm just grateful that you have taken the time to be a part of this discussion, to love these teenagers well. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so we're going to start with this fun word, and that is stigma. One of the hard things about approaching this topic is that in society, there is a big stigma around what it means to have mental illness. We come from a society that says, hey, you got to get it all figured out on your own. You have to be strong, can't show any emotion, and you got to just make it through life on your own. Stigma in our society says things like, mental illness is a sign of weakness. It says that we're supposed to just suck it up and deal with it like the rest of us are. It says that you probably did something to deserve what's going on in your life, that you're probably crazy if you're taking medication, or that you're unstable or scary, or all these different ideas that we really see present in culture. And I think this last one, is probably the most significant one that I see, that mental illness should be kept a secret so that other people are not uncomfortable. And I think for me in my life, one of the things that I found really important is to work really hard to not keep my own journey with mental illness a secret, because it's only in talking about it and only in bringing it to the light that we're able to come alongside other people and share our story fully. But besides this stigma, there's another stigma that we want to talk about in this conversation, and that is the stigma around mental illness within the church. Oftentimes in churches, we have this idea that mental illness is due to some spiritual phenomena going on in your life, whether that be that there's an unresolved sin, that you are now plagued with mental illness. Maybe that it's a punishment from God. Maybe it's that you are sinning because you have anxiety, because the Bible says not to fear, or that it's someone just being really discontent or not trusting God enough. Or even that mental illness is always a sign of demonic influences or a spiritual void of some kind. And not that in particular situations, there might be some situations where different ones of these might be true. However, on the whole, this perspective is really unhelpful, and it drives students and people who are struggling away from community and into secrecy in their mental illness. And so one of the goals of myself and Tyler in SWAP is to be a place where we're willing to walk towards the things that are heavy and hard and difficult, and not to drive them away into corners where they're hidden in the dark. I know that when I was a teenager, I had almost every single one of these said to me at one point. I had a counselor that started our very first counseling session by her having me read a prayer over myself that I would have no demonic influence in my life. And I was 16, and it freaked me out. And I was like, I'm never going back again, because I'm not some weirdo that has demons living in me, right? And that caused me to, I was like, if this is what happens when I ask for help, I never want to do it again, right? And so things like this kind of stigma is what we're trying to prevent. And that's why we're having this conversation. I believe that God made us physical, emotional, and spiritual beings. And I think historically the church has struggled to acknowledge the emotional and the physical. We love to talk about the spiritual, right? That's what we do here at church. But sometimes when we find someone who's struggling with their mental illness, the only answer we know to give is, well, did you pray about it? And I'm not at all limiting the power of prayer. However, as we look throughout the Bible, we see that God is a God who made us in the beginning good physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And now we are fallen physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And when we look in the Bible, we see that God is bringing redemption physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so as a church, I think it's important that we acknowledge all of those parts, and that God's miraculous healing can come through physical healing, like medication, through emotional healing, such as therapy, and through spiritual healing, such as prayer and connection with God. So as we dive into this conversation, that's the context I'm operating from, is from that context of we are spiritual, emotional, and physical people, and that God wants to bring us healing in all of those different ways, and that He is capable of doing that for everyone. So that's where I am coming from. So what exactly are we dealing with? Well, the ugly reality is that mental illness is very common. This quote here is from Access Ministries. If you saw on our resources table, we have a bunch of different parent packets. Those are all created from Access Ministries, and they put together parent packets around anything that is a popular hot topic in society that parents should maybe know about. And so I went through and I pulled a few of the ones that had to do with mental illness for today. But in their research, they said that anxiety disorders are one of the most commonly diagnosed mental illnesses. That affects more than 18% of the population every year. That depression affects 2 million teens, enough to impact their daily lives every single year. They also found that fewer than a third of those suffering from these very serious mental conditions ever receive treatment. And at the same time, this is very interesting to me, Lifeway research reported that nearly half of evangelical, fundamentalist, or born-again Christians believe that people with depression, anxiety, and other serious mental illnesses can overcome their condition by praying more often, growing in spiritual maturity, or reading the Bible more. Now, that statistic, I think, would be true if there was one word missing, and that is the word only, right? That they believe that that only is what's going to always bring healing. And I promise I'm not disregarding the fact that our spiritual connection with Jesus can bring healing, and that there are miracles that happen when we pray, and that all these different things are so good. But we're also, like I said, not acknowledging the physical and the emotional part. And so we want to just dive in a little more and speak to those parts as well. So what are we talking about? So the first thing that I want to do is get us all on the same page, right? What is mental illness exactly, and what is it not, right? Mental illness is not stress in a stressful situation. It's an excess of anxiety, fear, or worry in an otherwise calm situation. Mental illness is not a solitary incident of concern. It's a significant pattern of unhealthy behaviors. And mental illness is not teenage angst, right? It's a debilitating psychological and physical condition that not all teens experience. But it is so common that all of the teenagers that you encounter will know at least one person that is struggling with a significant mental illness. And that's an important distinction to make, is that this is not just your typical, oh, it's hard to grow up, right? These are significant patterns that are hindering the everyday functioning of our kiddos. So what does it look like? What is our goal? What does it look like to have a teen who is mentally healthy? And what does it look like to have a teen that is mentally ill? So here are some examples for us, right? A mentally healthy teen is able to engage and navigate the highs and lows of life appropriately, right? Life is going to be hard sometimes. Life is going to be wonderful sometimes, right? And so it's not that we're looking for teens that can, buckle up and hold on and never acknowledge hard things, right? But they can navigate those highs and lows of life appropriately. Whereas a mentally ill teen lives life at the poles, meaning they're only ever in the depths of despair, or they're only ever riding the high of life, right? A mentally healthy teen is able to create and maintain relationships of all kinds that are positive, right? Whereas a mentally ill teen has destructive relational habits or is unwilling to maintain positive relationships. A mentally healthy teen has effective functioning in their daily activities and is generally able to complete their daily tasks, right? Your average teenager probably needs reminders every once in a while to get their homework done, right? They're usually good. No, just kidding. Your typical healthy teen probably still needs a little bit of help along the way, but they have the ability to function in their daily activities. But a mentally ill teen cannot seem to accomplish the tasks that are in their ability, right? Homework, chores, I think of even just getting out of bed on time, right? Things like that just seem impossible. A mentally healthy teen is able to adapt to changes as they come, right? When their world shifts, they're able to kind of bob and weave and roll with the punches a little bit there. But a mentally ill teen is just completely derailed as soon as changes come. They can't hold on as life seems to be spinning out of control. And they'll exhibit reactions and moods that are overreactions or underreactions to these situations that come their way. Right? Whenever somebody overreacts to something or underreacts to something, that's a moment that we should say, hey, something different is going on there. Something deeper is going on there, because a mentally healthy teen will have reactions and moods and behaviors that will basically match the situation that's in front of them. And finally, a mentally healthy teen can engage in their faith in an appropriate way, but a mentally ill teen will be unable to reconcile their life with their faith, right? Because Their faith says God is good and is always with me, but their mental illness will say, I don't feel like that. I feel so alone. I feel all of these different things, right? And so reconciling the two is nearly impossible for a teen that is stuck in their mental illness. And this is all not to say that mentally ill teens can't have good days or mentally healthy teens can't have bad days, right? Life is messier than that. The lines are blurry. But when we see that pattern of more days being unhealthy than healthy, of more reactions being overreactions or underreactions than typical, that's when we have some conversations that might be worth having. So what happened, right? How do we get these teens that go from being, 10 years old and just happy and, figuring out life and, wide-eyed and wondering at the world to having a 13-year-old who just feels like they're falling apart, right? How do we get there? Well, it's way above my pay grade to tell you why, because I'm not a scientist or a counselor or anything, but I do think there are 3 ideas that can kind of help us get a better idea of where our teens are at. And also just note that every teen situation is so individual, and there's not going to be one reason that fits every single person across the board. But these 3 ideas that we're going to talk through, I think are going to help us kind of navigate and have a little bit of a better foundation to stand on when we're trying to maybe understand what's going on in the life of whatever teenager you have influence over, right? So first we're going to talk about a theory of development. Then we're going to talk about trauma, and then we're going to talk a little bit about biology. So this theory of development was offered by a 20th century psychologist named Erik Erikson, which is very creative, Erik Erikson, right? But what he did is he divided life into a series of stages that a person goes through as they're growing up. And with each stage, he talked about what a person is trying to figure out, right? What questions they're asking, what skills they're trying to acquire, how they're growing into being a person, if you will. And when we look at this theory of development, I think what it can help us think about is what exactly is my teen trying to figure out right now, right? What questions are they trying to figure out? What do they need right now? So when we look at our younger teens, right? Say like 10 to 12, maybe 13 years old. They are in this stage of development that Erikson called industry versus inferiority, which I don't find those 2 words quite as helpful as the question, right? So the question that they're navigating is, what can I do? How can I be good, right? This is where kids are learning what's expected of them in the world, right? Can they do what they need to in order to be accepted? Can they do what they need to be thought of as good enough? What do they need to do to be loved? What's expected of a person, right? So when a child feels like they're successful in this stage, they feel confident and capable. And they're like, yeah, I can do the things. I can turn in my homework. I can, go to the park by myself, and I can do all these different things, right? It's all about figuring out how to do life and then getting a high five from somebody for it, right? But failure during this stage produces a feeling of inferiority, right? What's wrong with me? Why can't I accomplish things the way that other people seem to be able to, right? This is where students are looking to earn love by figuring out how to be good enough. And when they succeed, they want to be affirmed by the influential adults in their lives, right? So kiddos that are in this stage of ages about 5 to 12, I see this a lot with so I teach 7th and 8th graders, right? So some of my less mature 7th graders, they'll do something and they'll come up to me and they'll be like, Miss Hedberg, I did this thing. I'm like, good, awesome. And they're just like beaming with pride that like, oh, I accomplished what I was supposed to accomplish. Can I have a really big high five for it? And they just want all of the praise. And it's so fun to give them the praise because then they just feel so accomplished and so confident and they feel competent, right? Then we get into that middle stage, which is super fun. And this stage is why I love being a youth pastor, because everyone's awkward and it's hilarious, right? This is the stage of identity versus confusion, right? This is where we have our 13 through 17-year-olds-ish asking the question, who am I? Is it okay to be me? Am I going to be accepted for being me? they're going to begin to struggle, right, with their identity. Success in this stage leads to a really strong sense of self, right? They've figured themselves out. They know what they like. They know who they are. They know what they don't like. They're able to kind of carry themselves with their heads high and like know who they are. But those that feel failure in this stage tend to emerge with a weak sense of self, and they feel really confused about who they are, and they'll come out of this stage feeling very meek about who they are, and that very insecure, right? So in this stage, students are looking for approval and acceptance for their individuality, right? They want to be loved for exactly who they are, for what's individual and special about them, because that's the thing in the world that they feel the most insecure about, right? So I think of with my students at school, I have one student who is hilarious, and she's really, really, really into drawing. And she's very, at the same time, she's very insecure. And so I've started every day when I come in, I say, okay, well, what have you been drawing recently? And she just perks up and comes and shows me what she's been drawing, because she's just starting to figure out who she is, and having that affirmation for what makes you different from everyone else is a good thing. And what makes you different from everyone else is what makes you uniquely you. And then finally, ages 18 to 40, which is where we all are, is intimacy versus isolation. So once our teenagers start to get more mature, right? I think of juniors and seniors in high school that are maybe a little older, teenagers. They start asking the question, can I love and be loved? How do I fit into the world around me, right? This is where they start getting boyfriends and girlfriends and all the things, right? And during this stage, a person begins to look outside of themselves, right? Up until this stage, it's all been me focused, me, right? I need to figure out myself. But in this stage, they begin to wonder where they're going to fit into the world around them and what it means to exist in our world that is built on relationships, right? So in the younger years of this stage, right, in ages about 16 to 19, right, students begin to wonder, or students are looking for a community where they are loved and wanted and valued as they are, right? So they're learning to develop that community. So as you think about the teens that are in your life, that you're influencing, right? And you look at these, is my teen working on developing their competency, developing their identity, or developing their community? Because those questions and where they are in wrestling through them will help us to understand exactly how they're doing and what questions they need answered and how, what's going on in their life, right? So the second thing I wanted to talk about is trauma, right? And I'm going to start off with this really big, really scientific, really heady quote that's really hard to understand. So here we go. Buckle up. We have learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also the imprint left by that experience on the mind, the brain, and the body. This imprint has ongoing consequences for how the human organism manages to survive in the present. Trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way that mind and brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our very capacity to think. And that quote is by a very well-known and well-respected researcher named Bessel van der Kolk, and he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's goes into all of this way deeper. But so lots of words, but to kind of parse it a little bit down, I think that our society has a misunderstanding of what trauma is, right? In our minds, trauma only counts if it's a gigantic car wreck and somebody has been wounded, or maybe soldiers coming back from war, or a really significant death in one's life, right? Trauma is is only labeled for the most horrific events in someone's life. But what we're finding is that this is a really incomplete definition of trauma. And if we can change that definition, it can help us to navigate our own minds and help our teenagers navigate what's going on in their lives as well. So I want you to think about the mind like a computer, okay? So every day you're going into different situations and you're opening up the files that you need for the situations you're in, and you've got your different tabs open, your different applications that you're running. And we all know that different computers are made to withstand different programs. They're made to withstand different kinds of files, all those different things. And God has designed the brain in this incredible fashion where every night your brain goes through and starts closing all the tabs and says, okay, we got that. That's done. We don't need that anymore. Oh, this, we got to save it before we put it away because we got to make sure that we can get it again tomorrow, and, make sure that the history is all there so that you have what you need. So every night your brain goes through and it processes and it kind of, empties out your desktop so that you can start the next day fresh and ready to go. So when a computer that is not made to open up a file tries to open up a file that is too big or it is incapable of opening up, it glitches out, right? And it tries over and over and over and over again to open up that file. It tries over and over again to overcome whatever glitch is getting in the way of the computer running that system, right? And if you let the program continue to run, what it's going to do is it's going to slow everything down. It's not going to be able to function properly, and most of the computer's effort is going to be focused on figuring out this problem, right? Overcoming this glitch. So what we're finding scientifically is that trauma actually has nothing to do with the size of the event that happens to you. The only thing that needs to have happened in order for trauma to affect somebody's brain is that the event that happened is written in a file that your computer cannot process, right? So you encountered a situation that your brain had no idea what to do with, and it's trying and trying and trying to make sense of it, right? To open the file, to overcome the glitch, to get through it. But it just can't, because the computer wasn't made to open that kind of file, right? And so that glitch gets in the way of the brain getting through life typically, right? So what happens is when that glitch hits, right? When we encounter something that our brain didn't know how to file, it triggers our brain's fear response, right? Our limbic system is amazing, and it triggers this response of either fight, flight, fold, or freeze, right? And our brain goes, oh my goodness, I don't know how to process this. I'm really afraid, so I'm gonna shut everything down, right? And because of that hardwired fight or flight response, it can't run the rest of the program, and the brain just gets stuck in the trauma, right? So now in our computer illustration, what we need to do in order to access that file is we need to reformat it, right? We need to make it smaller. We need to change what kind of file it is. We need to do whatever needs to be done to make it a file that our computer can process, right? It's just like that with our brains. And the only way that we can reformat the things that have happened in our lives that our brain didn't know how to process is by getting in a safe space where your brain doesn't have to be in fight or flight mode, and talking through and re-experiencing that experience and convincing your brain that, hey, I'm not in danger anymore. It's okay. You don't have to be stuck in this glitch anymore, right? And so trauma can take away so much of our brain's ability to function if we don't give ourselves the space and the calm and the opportunity to just start figuring out what happened without feeling that fight or flight response that is hardwired into our brains as a gift from God, right? To keep us safe. So that is why tools like therapy are so effective, right? Is because when you sit and you have a conversation about something hard that happened in your life, and you might say, it wasn't really that big a deal. It's not like other people go through so much harder things. Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. But if your brain can't process it, what you need to do is you need to get quiet, get safe, have a conversation, and start reformatting that file so that it can be safely put away and taken back out whenever you need it, right? It's not forgotten. You didn't delete it from the hard drive. It's still there, but now it's manageable, right? So the third thing that is going to help us understanding the mind of mental illness is biology, right? So we're going to dive into a little bit of a biology lesson. So exciting. So we've talked about the environment that your kid finds themselves in, right? We talked about trauma. We've talked about all of these different things about the development of a kid as they're growing up. But then there's just the fact of the biology of the brain, right? And so we're going to talk through a little bit about what happens in our brains that can give us some answers as to what is going on. So, quick biology lesson. There are these little things in your brain, and they are called neurons. And their job is to communicate and to spread information to the different parts of your brain that needs those pieces of information. And they're these funny looking cells. They look like this. And I like to think of them as like someone giving a high five, right? So this is like the brain of the neuron. And then this is its hand sticking out, right? And its little fingers, okay? And what it does is it gets with other neurons and it tries to pass information back and forth. But the way that neurons pass information back and forth in your brain is fascinating because they never actually touch, right? There's always space in between the neurons. And the way that they pass information is through electrical and chemical transactions, right? And so what'll happen is these little axon terminals, these little fingers, they'll get real close to another one and they'll make electrical and chemical transactions between the two that will spread information throughout the brain. And it looks something like this, right? So this is like two fingers coming up right next to each other, and they're trying to pass information back and forth, right? This is like the simplest of simple for your brain. It gets really confusing after you go further beyond this. However, so these chemical and these chemical reactions that are going on in your brain are really important, right? You have to have the right makeup of chemicals in order to have your brain make those connections properly. Those connections are called synapses, right? Those synapses need the right exact amount of chemicals in order for them to do things correctly. So in this diagram, you see on this side, there's all these little blue dots, right? And those blue dots represent serotonin, which is a chemical that the brain is passing between the two. And that's a chemical that helps you feel happy, right? And so your typical brain has no problem passing serotonin back and forth to help you feel happy, right? This is an image of somebody who has depression and their ability to produce and pass serotonin around in their brain. They just don't have enough, right? They just don't have enough to pass those things successfully. And no matter what you do, your brain's just not going to make enough, right? And so here, this is from the NCBI, NCBI. It says scientists understand that mental illnesses are associated with changes in neurochemicals, right? Like that serotonin, those things that they're passing between. For example, people who have depression, less of the neurotransmitter serotonin is released into the synaptic space than in people who do not have depression, right? And so it fundamentally, at the very basic level of the biology of somebody who has a mental illness, there is something going on, right? So like in my brain, I have bipolar 2. And what that means is that my brain doesn't know when to turn the faucet off, right? And so my brain will get all the serotonin and all the happy feelings and all the things, and it'll just like ride this high because, all the good feelings are great. But then as soon as something hits that feels difficult, my brain will turn on the difficult feelings and it will have no idea when it's had enough, right? And it makes life very complicated and back and forth and all the things. And so I take a medication that helps my brain know when to turn the faucet off, right? That helps my brain know, okay, I've given enough of this chemical, and I've received enough of this chemical, and it helps my brain to process things that way. And that's what these medications do, right? And I am so much more of a whole person now that I have found this medication that helps me stay right in between those two crazy extremes, right? That keeps me in between. And the fact that I need medication isn't a moral failing on my part, right? The fact that I need medication isn't a sign that I am some wild, crazy sinner that is just, falling apart, right? The fact that I need medication is just evidence that the world, down to its very core, is broken, right? I believe that mental illness is a result of the fall, right? I believe that in God's good, perfect earth, there was no mental illness, but I don't buy that mental illness is a result of sin, in my personal, individual sin, right? That I did something sinful that caused my own mental illness, right? Because when we look at the very biology of the ways that we're made, we see brokenness even down to this molecular level, right? And so God has made these brilliant scientists able to figure this out and say, here, Kelly, here's a little pill. It'll help you get through the day. You'll be able to be more a whole person. You'll be able to connect with God better. You'll be able to be there for your students more. And so for me, that's been a transformative thing in my life. And so as parents and people who influence teens, when we think about this tricky topic of mental illness, it's important to remember that at this physical level, medication and diagnoses and things like that are not something to be afraid of. They're something that can help us get to the point where we're able to be who God has called us to be and be redeemed in that small way when we have those things going on in our minds. Okay, we have navigated the brain and the development of an adolescent and all these different things, right? But how do we help, right? We've realized that there's a problem. We've noticed the patterns, noticed the signs. How exactly do we help? Well, the first thing that I think is important to do is to figure out what we mean by help, right? What is help? What does help look like in this situation? And it's in this question that I'm going to be just a little direct. As people who have profound influence on teenagers, whether that be as parents or as, different mentors or me as a youth pastor, right? We need to make sure that we're not just trying to solve behavior, right? So in this conversation around mental illness, behavior is always a symptom. It's never the problem, right? It's always a symptom. And sure, it would be really helpful if your kid just got out of bed on their own, or if they would get their grades up, or it would be really helpful if they would turn off their Xbox, right? And yes, all of those things are signs of health. However, if we just manage the behavior, we're going to actually solve nothing. Because scientifically, your kids are probably able to white knuckle it and hold on for like a month or two at a time. So like they could probably just like grin and bear it and, make it through and keep their bed made and everything for about a month before everything will fall apart again. Okay. And so if all we're doing is we're trying to manage these symptoms, these behaviors that we don't like, we're not actually making any sort of lasting, profound, deep change in their lives. And my goal, whenever I talk to students, is to set them up to have conversations that will lead them down a path of health for the rest of their lives, not just to fix what's happening today. And sure, what's happening today might be really frustrating. You can ask my parents. I don't think I got out of bed on my own for my entire junior and senior year of high school. And it was their favorite part of the day. It was waking me up. But that is just simply a symptom, right? And so if we can, as frustrating as it may be, change that perspective of we're not managing behavior, we're seeking health, that can help us figure out how do we help, right? So I have two phrases that we're going to focus in on, right? That I think are a really great focus for what it means to help. And these are actually, I did not come up with these. I got these from Robert Vore, who is one of the guys from that podcast I mentioned, CXMH podcast. And he says that help looks like having conversations that facilitate healing and promote resilience, all right? Having conversations that facilitate healing and promote resilience. So we're going to break this down and get really practical. But when we talk about helping, those are our goals, is creating spaces and situations where we are able to facilitate healing and promote resilience in our teenagers. So the first thing to keep in mind as we are looking to do this, looking to help, looking to facilitate that healing and promoting resilience, is to be a safe adult, right? And this might feel like, well, yeah, duh. Like, I love my kid. I'm here at this class. I signed up to learn more things. Like, of course I'm a safe adult for my kid. However, this is where we need to pause and take a really hard look to make sure that we are setting ourselves up in a way to be a safe adult where our students feel like they can come and talk to us, right? So we know that one of the keys to successful, healthy, competent adulthood is fostering safe connections with people, right? And how wonderful would it be if the strongest and first safe connection that somebody creates is with their parents, with their mentor, with this adult that is paying attention to them, right? So what does this look like? Well, if I am a student who is struggling with mental illness, right? Many students fear hurting someone that they talk to, which is why they don't want to go talk to someone, right? And a safe adult in that situation would be non-reactive and calm, right? So if I am somebody who is afraid to share my vulnerability with somebody else, if I encounter someone that is like, I say something to them like, I'm really struggling with depression, and the person I'm talking to goes, oh my goodness, right? That is gonna feel like I hurt the person I'm talking to, right? A safe adult is someone who is non-reactive and calm. Also, many students fear a person ridiculing their experience, right? They fear being told, yeah, you're fine, whatever. They fear someone going and telling people that don't need to know, right? A safe adult is going to let students know that their vulnerabilities are going to be handled with care, right? Maybe what a student is bringing to you from your perspective feels like probably not a big deal, right? From your outside perspective, you're like, whatever, this is like a small thing, whatever. But the fact that they're extending it to you as a vulnerability means that you need to, like, as best as you can, handle that vulnerability with the care that it needs so that students know that they're safe and that these things are not going to be shared with anybody who doesn't need to know. Many students fear being hated for their struggle, right? They fear being a disappointment. They fear that they've let someone down who's important to them. A safe adult believes the best in a student no matter what, right? No matter what they may bring you. It's, I still believe in you. My view of you hasn't changed. I still think you're wonderful. I love you as much right now as I did 10 minutes ago, right? A safe adult is someone who believes the best for that student and believes in the future for that student, right? That someone who can look at a student and say, hey, you might not have hope for tomorrow right now, but I do. I have hope for your tomorrow, right? Someone who continues to believe in that student. And finally, a lot of students really, really, really fear hurting a person that they love, right? I had a conversation recently with a student who was struggling with, we were talking and he was like, oh, my problems are just not a big deal because they're just high school problems, is what he said to me. And I was like, okay, what do you mean? And he's like, well, they're just no big deal. They're just high school problems. And so whenever I take students away from this building, I have something called my mom bag. And Dan can attest to this. He's one of our youth leaders. It is a very heavy bag that is chocked full of Band-Aids and granola bars and water and all the things that any student could possibly need, right? You forgot a pen, I've got a pen. You forgot a hair binder, I've got a hair binder, right? My mom bag it's prime, let me tell you. I'm pretty proud of it, right? But it is very heavy, right? We went to Alaska and I was like hiking with it on, and some of my senior guys were like, Kelly, like, why are you hiking with that? And I'm like, because you're going to fall and hurt yourself and I need to have Band-Aids, right? So I got my mom bag, right? And so I'm talking to this student and I said, hey, what if I needed somebody to help me carry my mom bag? And I asked, Tyler Rowland is our other student pastor. He has a 6-year-old named Oliver. I said, what if I asked Oliver to carry my mom bag for me? And he was like, that would be dumb. And I'm like, why would that be dumb? And he's like, because he couldn't do it. It's such a heavy bag. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And I said, would it be Oliver's problem that he's not strong enough? Or would it be my problem that I asked him to handle something he couldn't carry? And he's like, well, it'd be your fault because he can't carry that. And I said, exactly. Here's the thing. Safe adults don't take their burdens off and put them on teenagers, right? Safe adults don't tell teenagers that their problem is emotionally crushing them, right? Safe adults don't look at a teenager and say, your problems don't matter because I have big problems in my life, right? Because the thing is, the problems that your teenagers are carrying are just the right size for them right now. And they feel really heavy for them right now. And so safe adults are people who know that it might be really heavy for them. And you might be on the outside being like, oh my gosh, just get it together, right? But the thing is, for them, it feels heavy, right? And so being a safe adult means not expecting your teenager to carry your problems. And it also means not being emotionally crushed by the weight of whatever your student brings to you. And in order to do that, that means we need to be healthy adults, right? We need to have other people outside of our teenager who's helping us carry our bag, right? We need to have other people that we are able to go to when we're feeling overwhelmed and not be relying on our teenager, right? Yeah, that student that I was talking to that day, he was like, oh, so does that mean my problems do matter? And I looked at him and I was like, yes, they do. And this is why we're having this conversation right now, is because your problems fit you just perfectly. And it really affirmed him to hear that, like, oh, I'm allowed to struggle with friends at school and not feel like it's a stupid problem, right? Because it's a real problem for him, right? Yes. So this requires a lot of really hard introspection, and that to figure out, like, am I interacting with my teen in this way? Secondly, a author named John Acuff uses this phrase called the gift of going second. And I think that this is a really profound thing. So we know that it's incredibly hard to choose to be vulnerable, right? As adults, we're really bad at it. And teenagers are too. And so one of the best gifts we can give our teenagers in our life is this gift of going second. My throat's getting dry here. Yes. Okay. So let's say that you have a student in your life that is struggling with an eating disorder, right? It's really, really, really hard for a 14-year-old to come up to an adult person and say, hey, I really don't like the way that I look, so I'm throwing up every time I eat, right? Getting that sentence from the inside to the outside is like so hard. But you know what sentence is a lot easier? Hey, me too, right? So as adults, creating environments where we are able to let the student say, hey, me too, it will create an environment where there's a a passing of vulnerability that lets them open up more. Now, obviously, we have to do this really appropriately, right? We can't be putting our backpack on their back, right? But to be human means to experience disappointment. It means to experience loneliness, to experience pain and suffering and all of these different things. And so looking at a student and saying, hey, sometimes I get really overwhelmed, and then the more overwhelmed I get, I just can't get things done. Are you ever like that? And then they'll say, yeah, I get super stressed out, and this is what happens. And then you have dialogue going, right? And then you can dive in and see what's going on there. But the thing is, that first sentence, getting it out, sometimes it just feels impossible, right? And it's not even that your student doesn't want to talk to you, it's that they just can't get the first sentence out. And so giving them the gift of going second, giving them the gift of being able to join in a conversation that's already started, I've seen in my conversations with students has been just so helpful. I even see, there's been a couple times where I've shared my testimony in church, and I'll have people come up to me and say, hey, I struggle with my mental health too, right? And they feel so known, right? Oh, no one knows this, but I can say this now because you started the conversation, right? So as a safe adult in the life of a teen who's maybe struggling with their mental illness, give them the opportunity to say, oh, I didn't think I could say this out loud, but now because you started the conversation, I think I can, right? Now, there is one caveat here, and that is to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So what can easily happen as you're having these conversations is that you might lay an expectation on a student that they could internalize. So let me give you an example, right? So let's pretend I'm talking to a student who has anxiety, and I'm trying to start the conversation, right? I'm trying to do all the steps, right? I'm going to give them the opportunity to go second. And I go up to a student and I say, hey, so I see you struggling with anxiety. I've struggled with anxiety. And what I did is I ate kale salads and I prayed this one super specific prayer, and then it was gone and everything's great now. You should try that, right? What the kid is going to hear is there's something uniquely wrong with me because what you didn't work for me, right? And that can drive them even further away because they're going to say, I'm even worse than I thought. I'm even more broken than I thought, right? So be descriptive and maybe rewrite that script of like, hey, I know you're struggling with anxiety. When I was struggling with that, I ate some kale salads and I started praying a lot more, and I don't know, it kind of seemed to help at some points. What kinds of things have been helping you, right? See how I'm not telling them, hey, you should do that because it's going to fix you. It's, hey, what kinds of things help you, or what kinds of things make it worse for you, right? That way we're not prescribing what they should be doing, but we're inviting them into a conversation where you say, hey, we might have some common ground here. Let's talk about it, right? Finally, we have to remember that experiences create experiences. And what I mean by this is that if your child has only ever experienced you as being nervous or angry or impatient or judgmental or dismissive of their feelings when they bring you vulnerabilities, then it doesn't matter how loud you say, I'm a safe adult. They're not going to experience you as a safe adult, right? So our goal is to create so many experiences of safety that they start to experience you as a safe adult, right? I heard someone say once that it's not about one 100-minute conversation, it's about 100 one-minute conversations, right? Consistently being safe so that experience creates experience, right? I think about with the students downstairs, if I were to spend all of my time at SWAP with our students, like just judging them and being like, why aren't you a good Christian yet? Why do you still make mistakes and like mess up sometimes, right? Then I would never have students coming to my door and saying, hey, Kelly, we need to talk. I did something that I regret, right? So as parents, as people who have influence over teenagers, this is where we need to like be super intentional, right? Choosing to be so safe, even when you want to blow up and yell at them or whatever, choosing to be so safe is going to give you the conversation in 3 weeks that you want to have right now. 100 1-minute safe conversations will get you to that conversation that you're hoping to have, because experience creates experience. It's not actually about what you say, it's about how you show up every day, right? You can yell till you're blue in the face, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. But until you show up as a safe adult in their life consistently, they're not going to believe you, right? And so it's taking that intentionality, taking that time, 100 1-minute moments of being a safe adult. Okay, so we've done the work to be a safe adult. We've created opportunities for our students to experience us in a safe way. We're giving them the opportunity to go second, and then you're there, right? Your student begins to open up, and they bring you their vulnerability. And you're like, oh, what do I do now? Okay, conversation, here we go, go time. What do we do now, right? I think if we all could memorize this sentence and live into this sentence, all of the teenagers in our life would be so positively affected. We need to be a non-judgmental presence that has no agenda except just to be there, right? A non-judgmental presence that has no agenda except just to be there. So we're going to take this apart a little bit. So we are going to try our best to be a non-judgmental presence when students bring us vulnerability. And in order to do this, the first thing we need to do is we need to listen, and we need to listen deeply, okay? This is where you hear the words that your kid is saying, but you also hear beneath the words, okay? For example, I have 2 phrases that I go to when I'm not doing well, but I don't want to tell anyone about it. And there's a circle of people in my life that know that the more times that I say the words "I'm fine" in a conversation means the less fine I probably am, right? The other one is that I say, the people will be like, "How are you doing?" And I'll say, "Ah, it's going." When I say it's going, it's probably not going well, right? Those words are fine words, but I have people in my life. I think of the women I live with. I live with 3 roommates, right? And as soon as I show up at home and they're like, "How was your day?" And I'm like, "Man, it's fine. It was fine. It's fine." Like, 3 fines, not fine. Tell me about your day, right? And they'll just call me out on it right there. And they'll be like, "Hey, I love you enough to listen beneath the words you said," right? Listen deeply. And in order to do that, we have to be really present, right? If you are not there with your kid and you're thinking about the dinner you're trying to make or the next thing you want to say or anything else, then you're going to miss it, right? It's about learning to speak this secret language with your kid where you kind of figure out the nuances, where you figure out what's going on. And yes, it's a puzzle, and yes, it's hard, but what a gift we have to get to try to figure that out, right? So learn to listen deeply, but then also learn to ask deeply, right? Sometimes asking deeply is as easy as adding 1 word. "How you doing?" Really? That 1 word gets me miles with your students in youth group. "Hey, how you doing really?" "Oh, I don't know. School's kind of hard right now." It went from, "How you doing? I'm fine," to, I don't know, school's kind of hard right now, right? Asking the deeper question, right? Making the question just hard enough that they don't get to avoid it, right? So in order to ask these questions deeply, it's the same thing as listening deeply. We have to be present, right? We have to be firmly planted in the conversation, right? If you are trying to figure out how you can fix the situation, if you're trying to think about other things, then you're not going to be able to have deeper questions to ask of them, right? And then, this is the hard one. Not that the other 2 haven't been hard, but I think this one's really hard. choose curiosity rather than judgment. Always choose curiosity. You know, one of the most transformative questions you can ask your student is, what's that experience like for you? Right? So oftentimes I'll have students come up to me that'll say, Kelly, I'm really struggling with anxiety, right? Well, I have an anxiety diagnosis, but what I experience as anxiety might look completely different than what the student in front of me experiences as anxiety. So asking, what is that experience like for you, lets them own their experience instead of me making all these assumptions about what things are like for them, right? For example, in one of the darker seasons of my life, right up until I got diagnosed with bipolar 2, I was really struggling, like really, really, really struggling. And I did not cry for 16 months, which is surprising because I was struggling, right? And so when we look in and we choose curiosity instead of judgment, it helps us to understand the fullness of what's going on with your teenager, right? You're not making assumptions. You're not making judgments. You're not deciding what's going on in them. You're asking them, hey, what's going on in you? Tell me. I want to hear. I want to know, right? Be curious. Ask the question. Get into your student's shoes and walk around a bit, right? See if you can figure out what things they're experiencing, and finally get as prepared as you can, right? And proud of you for being here to get as prepared as you can, right? But the biggest gift that you can give a teen is to be unshockable, right? The biggest gift that you can be is to just be unfazed. When they bring you their difficulty, not going, oh my word, right? That is the biggest gift, right? I think of in the last year, I've had students come up to me at youth group and say, hey, Kelly, I'm really struggling. I really want to kill myself, right? And being able to respond and say, okay, you're safe. Let's talk about it. Thanks for sharing, right? Just keeping it calm. That's the same reaction I give to, hey, Kelly, I'm in a fight with my friends at school and it's making school super awkward. Okay, I'm sorry. Thanks for sharing. You're safe. Want to talk about it? Right? Being unfazed is the biggest gift that you can give to a teenager, because what they perceive is that their struggle is a grenade, right? And they're coming to you and you've said, I'm a safe person. You said, I want to talk about it. I want to hear what's going on in your life. And they say, okay, I'm going to pull the pin, right? And if they pull the pin on their vulnerability, your whole job is to disprove their belief that you're going to get hurt by it. Your whole job is to disprove their belief that you're going to turn and run because the explosion's going to be too scary, right? So your job is to sit there and say, yeah, that's kind of messy. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. I'm not disappointed by you. You're safe. We're here together. Let's work through this. So sometimes what that takes is actually practicing not having shock face, right? Because I don't have children, but I would assume that having your child that you love more than anything look at you and say, hey, mom and dad, this is what I'm struggling with, could probably be like the most painful thing for you to hear, right? And as people who have influence on teenagers, as parents, what you need to do is know that you have somebody else to take all those feelings to, because those feelings are real and they're not going to go away, right? But you need to have someone else who is not your teenager to bring those feelings to, right? Maybe your kid looks at you and says, Mom, Dad, I'm really struggling with self-harm, right? You can freak out inside, but on the outside, you say, hey, I'm here, I'm with you. And then you turn and you go and you find your people and you say, oh my goodness, I'm freaking out. That was horrible, and right? But the thing is, that teenager needs to know none of that, because what they're going to internalize is, I'm not safe. When I'm vulnerable, other people get hurt. I'm going to put my parents in a crisis. I'm going to become a burden. All of these things, right? And your kids love you. They don't want to put you in a tailspin. They don't want to make your life hard. So they're just going to bear it by themselves, right? So giving the gift of being unshockable, giving the gift of being prepared, of literally practicing. I'm not going to have shock face, okay, in the mirror, right? Practicing with your spouse, practicing with anyone, right? Yes. We do not want a teenager's choice to confide in someone to lead to a negative crisis experience, right? Because they're taking a really scary step forward. And if they get met with this big crisis explosion, they're going to back right up and they're not going to open up again, right? So we want to meet those vulnerabilities with grace and with gentleness and with calm, right? So do what you need to do to not freak out. Have resources. Get knowledge. Know where you can go for the answer, right? Maybe you don't have the answer, but know that you know where you can go. Know, like, okay, whatever my kid tells me, I can probably call Kelly in 5 minutes and we'll figure something out, right? Know that you're not alone in this, right? It only makes sense to freak out if you're by yourself handling the situation, but you're not. There are resources, right? You're not alone. When you start presenting that calmness to you, the more your student will be able to trust that moving forward, they can bring you bigger and bigger things, right? Because oftentimes our kids are going to test the water. Or at least that's how I was. I was like, here's this like little half cup of vulnerability. What are you going to do with that? And if I got the response that I wanted, then I would say, okay, here's a cup, right? Oh, they don't hate me. Okay. Maybe this big thing, this like really big thing, the thing that's I'm really struggling with, maybe now it's safe for me to bring to this person, right? Promoting resilience and facilitating healing comes about with being a non-judgmental presence with no agenda except just to be there. This is really hard, right? Because you're watching your kid, or you're watching this teen in your life that you have some sort of influence over, come and say, I have a problem. And all of us want to go, oh my goodness, I love you. Let me take it away and fix it. But this is the part where you shut up and sit there. Tyler and I use this phrase that we're going to sit in the suck, right? Whatever sucks in your life, we're going to pull up a chair right next to you and we're going to sit down right in it. And we're just going to be there. We're just going to be with you in the mud of what's going on in your life. This is where you come alongside your student and you say, oh my goodness, I don't really know what to say, but I'm so glad you told me. And you just sit there and you say, this is really, really hard. I'm so sorry that you're feeling this, but I love you in the middle of this mess. Or this is where you tell your student the things that you probably never say, right? We never say, hey, just so you know, you can always tell me anything. We never actually say, hey, there's nothing you can do that will make me stop loving you. We kind of just assume our kids know that, right? This is where we get in the practice of saying it, right? We look at them and we say, hey, I love you. You're not a disappointment. These feelings don't define you. I'm not going anywhere. I will be here no matter how messy this gets. I don't know what to do, but I'm here with you. I love you. You're not alone. I'm right here, right? This is where we get to say all of these things that we're really bad at saying. But here's the fun part is as soon as you say it, you blow their minds because they're convinced. I've never met a student with mental illness who is not convinced that if they actually get real, people will leave them. I've never met a student with mental illness who doesn't believe that the second they say the really big heavy thing that's on their chest, that they're not going to be left alone because they're too big of a mess. And this is where you get to disprove them. You get to say, hey, you can get as messy as you are, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't need to understand the pain. You can't fix the pain. You don't need to wrap their pain in theology and put a bow on it, right? You don't need to get them back to normal. You just got to be present. And I promise you that your student will feel miles more loved by you sitting next to them and saying, man, I don't know what to do, but I'm right here, than you saying, all right, this is what we're going to do. You're feeling this way. We got this, that, and the other thing. We're going to do it, and you're going to be all better in 5 minutes, right? I promise you that your student will feel so much more loved and more understood than just trying to get them back to being a fully functional teenager, right? Which is already marginally functional, right? This is also where you need to know your own limits, right? This is where you look at your student and you do, the fancy term is assessing their functional impairment, right? It's how much is this actually inhibiting your day-to-day life, right? Is this something that is heavy that you need an adult to walk with you through? Or is this something where we got to get professionals involved because I have no idea? Like, I have no idea what to do with you, right? This is where you create a team, right? This is where you look at your student and you say, hey, you're loved and we're going to make a team and we're going to fight this together, right? Here is the truth. You as a parent choosing to fight for your kid's mental health by yourself is exhausting, and it's not really possible, right? It's going to leave you feeling isolated. It's going to leave your kid feeling disappointed because you can't be everything to your kid that they need, right? And it's going to leave them in a place where they're no better than where they started. This is why at SWAP we have not just me and Tyler. This is why we have small group leaders. This is why we have different safe adults in students' lives. So it's not just one person. They have all these different safe adults coming around them and saying, hey, we all are around you. We all love you. We're all here rooting for you. I can be here for you in this way, just like he can be there for you in this way, and you can be there for them, right? We become this team surrounding a teenager so that they're just never alone, right? So this is where you might have to swallow a little pride because your teenager might not want to talk to you right away. They might not want to talk to you for 6 months. They might not want to talk to you for 2 years. Maybe they just have to practice getting vulnerable with safe people that aren't their parents first, right? The first people that I got vulnerable and real with were not my parents, right? The practice of getting vulnerable and real sometimes means bringing a different safe adult into your team that you can trust, that your teen is willing to talk to, right? And sometimes that can be painful, right? Because you're like, but I'm here, I love you, I want to be here for you, right? But if they're just not ready, you got to just build the team. You got to find the people, because it's bigger than being about you as the superhero who steps in and solves the problem. It's about helping the teen in the best way that we can, right? This is where you invite those safe adults to foster connection. This is also where you can give your teen a little bit of empowerment in their own journey. Like, you can literally say to them, hey, it's really okay if you don't want to talk to me. Who could we put on your team that you would like to talk to? Right? And like, have that conversation. Like, who should you go get coffee with? I'll drive you to go get coffee with whoever you need to talk to, right? Who do you want to be with you on this journey, right? This is where you can empower them. You can say, hey, you know what? I think it'd be a good idea to get a therapist involved. What do you think, right? And maybe they'll be resistant, and maybe you kind of have to do the parent thing and be like, okay, but you're going anyway, haha. But this is where you get to do that, like, empowerment of saying, hey, let's be a part of this together. Now that you've brought me this vulnerability, now that you've been brave to step out, let's do something about it. in a very gentle way where there is a team surrounding you and supporting your kid, right? This goes back to right where we started with that stigma of feeling like everything needs to be a secret, right? I promise you, it's going to be so much more difficult and so much harder to navigate if you decide to keep everything so close to the chest and everything such a secret that there's no other people in your teen's life that can speak into what it is that they're experiencing. And the more safe adults that they have around them, speaking truth, speaking God's word, giving them a safe space to talk, giving them a safe space to open up, the more they're going to start to believe that they actually are known and loved, right? This is painted in our SWAP space because it is probably the most common phrase you'll hear in SWAP student ministries is that, hey, you are known and you are loved. And what we mean is God knows your mess and he loves you. We can know your mess and we love you, right? You are known all the way down to the deepest, darkest thought you might have, and you are loved, and we are not going anywhere. And when you have that team around your teen, they get to actually experience that in a new way. So that is what I have for you all tonight. We have about 15 to 20 minutes left. I was thinking we could maybe open it up for any questions. Otherwise, if you guys want to check out those resources or just mingle, have some discussion, do some more downloading and discussing of those things, we can do that as well. But before we do that, I would love to just close in prayer and then we can do questions, discussion, all of those kinds of things. So let's go ahead and pray. Dear Lord, I just thank you. I thank you that we are wonderfully made by you. I thank you that your word says that you have a good plan for your people. That even when we feel like we are in the darkest valley, that God, you are right there. And those promises are true. God, I pray that as we are seeking to be a safe adult, a positive influence in the lives of the teenagers that we are around, God, would you just open up opportunities for us to prove to them that they are not alone, for us to prove to them that they are loved by a God who is bigger than whatever is going on in their lives, and that they are not ever alone. God, I just thank you for this group of people here who found it important to take some time to have this discussion about mental illness and how to best support teenagers. God, I pray that we would here at Edinbrook just grow to be a community where we want students to know that they are loved and that there is healing and redemption for them spiritually, physically, and emotionally. God, we just thank you so much for who you are, for your constant presence, and for how you have good things in store for us. We love you so much. And in your name we pray. Amen.